Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel. April 18th, 2018.
Warning: The Savage Nation contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised. And now, America's most exciting radio talk show, The Savage Nation, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, author of Liberalism is a Mental Disorder, Trump's War, and God, Faith, and Reason, Michael Savage.
Aquí está Savage. Opening with a little Cuban music. For a reason. Because I am so sick and tired of Comey, of Mueller, of talk show hosts who have one string on their broken banjos. I can't take it anymore. Play it again, Sam. Play it again, Clint. I open up... Now turn it off. I open up the website this morning for the news, 5 in the morning. Ruthless Miguel Torul Cuba is on the Drudge Report. So I said, okay, poor Cuban people. They suffered through the mafia state of the Castro brothers for all of these years. Now the next one's coming along, Miguel now, to again keep the Cuban people locked up like prisoners in a fortress. And the left can't get enough of these prisoners. That's what they want for you here. That's what Jerry Brown wants. That's what Al Sharpton wants. Ruthless Miguel Torul Cuba. So I said, okay, I'll open with that. And then look at the other stories today. Arab professor at Fresno State calls Barbara Bush an amazing racist. Wait. This lowlife, this talentless lowlife Arab professor of English was granted an American Book Award last year for her story collection entitled He, Me, Muhammad Ali. And she curses Barbara Bush. She says, I will never be fired. I have tenure. And I make $100,000 a year, so go to hell, basically. She is pictured with a Palestinian scarf, often used to express solidarity with the Palestinian uprising against the Jews in Israel. So this is what teaches now on the campuses because of the tolerance that the liberals have brought us. But there are other stories. That's not the only one. We know the university professor who slammed Barbara Bush as an amazing racist will not be fired. Whereas if a conservative said something about Jerry Brown, they'd be fired. I'd never be hired. They get fired. Then I read that Nikki Haley, you know who she is, the warmonger, ambassador to the UN. Nikki Haley, never liked her, never trusted her. Nikki Haley's deputy ambassador led the Never Trump movement and launched Zuckerberg's Open Borders group I read on Breitbart. I couldn't believe my eyes. You talk about the enemy within. This is inside Trump's inner circle. Nikki Haley, the bombardier. The bombardier of the bombardier of the Trump Air Force, next to Mustachio, who's the pilot of Trump's Air Force. Her deputy ambassador led the Never Trump movement and launched Zuckerberg's Open Borders group. Then I find something obscure for you. The search for truth in the rubble of Douma and one doctor's doubts over the chemical attack, and he's a Muslim doctor, a Syrian Muslim doctor, Dr. Assam Rahabani. And he says that the patients were overcome not by gas, but by oxygen starvation in the rubbish-filled tunnels and basements in which they lived on a night of wind and heavy shelling that stirred up a dust storm. Bad luck for you on the left to read this one. So I read all of this stuff, and I say to myself, do you think you really want to talk about this with the amount of time on earth that we're granted by God? This is what you want to waste your time talking about? So I put up the Arab professor at Fresno State calls Barbara Bush amazing racist. Both she can't be fired and makes $100K a year. I put it up on my Twitter to see what the people have to say. And one guy sends me an email, says, that's free speech, Savage. You make your living thanks to that protection, as does this professor. So I answered him. I said, faulty analogy. Kids have to sit and be graded by her. Prague listeners can just turn off my radio program. Obviously, you never learn to reason. So now you understand why having reason in the radio business is so important. Because I didn't have to yell, he didn't have to yell, he didn't have to curse me, I didn't have to curse him. I try to use reason. You understand? Now, but that's not what I want to talk about. None of this is what I want to talk about today, even though the stories are awesome. And if I wanted to yank your chain, I could work the Arab professor story for 2 hours right now. If I really wanted to yank your chain, I could keep doing the Arab professor calling Barbara Bush an amazing racist. I could yank your chain for 2 hours, but that's not what I'm going to do. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. It's something you'd not expect except from someone like me. And I realize I haven't been doing enough of this for a long time now. I got sucked into the vortex of the low IQ crowd in the media. I received over the weekend pictures of a great-grandfather and a great-grandmother I never met. It turns out there's a distant relative somewhere in America who's doing the genealogy of the family. And I never met the man. I never knew. I knew he had to exist. I wouldn't be here without him. God bless him. I get the picture of my great-grandfather, and I started to have conversations with him in my head. Because there are cultures on earth that believe that their ancestors are with them at all times, watching them, watching their every act, and it's what keeps them in check. Do you understand that? Now, counter that with the people at Coachella, for example. People who don't think they had any ancestors. Think of the Kardashians, people who think they have no ancestors. They represent the ultimate form of human depravity, where they think that they came along out of nowhere and there's nothing that's going to precede, nothing preceded them and nothing will follow them. That's the ultimate form of narcissism that is at the root of the destruction of the human race. Those of us who actually carry around our ancestors in our head are those who keep the human race sane and alive, whether you're a Native American, because I know many tribes do this. As you know, I spent many years collecting medicinal plants in very rare islands of the South Pacific, and I'm talking a long time ago, before tourism overtook these areas, and I used to collect primitive art. You can't find it anymore. It's all in museums. And most of these ancestral pieces of art, for example, from New Guinea or New Britain or New Ireland, at that time contained figures that codified the ancestry of that person. The artist would carve something out of a tree trunk, and there would be ancestral faces in it and bodies, because they understood quite well that none of us were born unto ourselves. We are all born of a mother who was 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 born of a mother ad infinitum. And so if you forget that chain, that you're part of this human chain of evolution within your own family, what you become is a narcissist without past, without future, and frankly an empty present. So I ask myself, am I getting too far afield? You want me to stop and go back to the news of the day? I can't. I'm sorry. I'm through with it. I am not interested in the Arab professor. I'm not interested in the news of the day. I'm not going to sit here like the chatter people and talk about Mueller and lock her up. Can't do it. Not today. Thank you. Something happened in me when I looked at the picture of the great-grandfather who I never met. He's staring right at me through this kind of weird daguerreotype taken around 1860, 70, I don't know when, 1870, somewhere in Russia, Poland, somewhere over there, where almost everybody who was left behind was annihilated and killed either by the Nazis or then by the Russians, one or the other. They were killed by both sides, by the way. Their equal opportunity genocide was committed. And I look at him and I say to him, okay, great-grandfather, what would you have me talk about today to millions of people, great-grandfather, who I have never met? And so far I haven't received an answer. So I'm going to turn you into a question. What would my great-grandfather want me to talk about today to millions of people? I mean, I can tell you that I don't know. What would your great-grandfather want you to talk about today if you had the opportunity that I have, the gift of the microphone and the gift of the ability to express my thoughts clearly and a great education with tens of thousands of books that I have read, well, thousands of books that I've read in my life? What would you have me talk about when you think about all the subjects under the sun? All the subjects under the sun. We're going to talk about 4 subjects today. Mueller and Comey now. Or someone on Fox News who dropped out of college, who now you count on as a great advisor to the Western world. This is unbelievable to me. Great advisor to the Western world dropped out of college. Unbelievable, the world I'm living in. So, grandfather, what do you want me to talk to? You already turned it off already. You're on Wallbanger's show already. You want to hear the basic. Mueller, lock her up. Mueller, Comey, lock her up. Mueller. Do you have conversations with deceased ancestors, or do you think you're crazy if you did? Would you call a psychiatrist? Would you call a psychiatrist if you thought you were talking to a deceased ancestor who talked to you with wisdom? Well, you'd probably call a doctor who's a bigger nut than you are, put you on medication, and tell you don't even have those conversations because you don't know where it might lead. I don't care what your race is or your ethnicity or your background. I'm sure there are people listening to the show who can relate to what I am saying. And if not, well, you're out of luck, because this is what I'm going to talk about. Oh, I know I could play sound bites of Jerry Brown saying that low-life politicians are to blame for the nation's immigration impasse. But I'm so not interested in Jerry Brown. I can talk about immigration until I'm blue in the face. You know why? Because I'm an immigrant son. And in fact, I have the manifest of passengers from the ship that they took coming on over here to America, landing here in 1920. I have the manifest of the people. 7 of them came over. My grandmother came with 6 or 5 children. It's right here. Here's their names. Here are their names. List or manifest of alien passengers for the United States. Can you believe this? Do you know how powerful this is to be an immigrant son in a time where immigration is such a hot topic? Is there anyone in the national media who can say that they are an immigrant son other than me? No. It gives me a very special view of the subject on both sides of that particular straddle. And so there are the names. Grandpa came here first. He worked for 7 years and sent the money home to bring over the others and got him out just in time before the tsunami hit and killed everyone in the village and killed everyone in the country who was not of a certain, let's say, orientation or stripe. And you think about this, fate and what fate is. They were very poor, and I was told they were so poor, the story came down to me that they lived in a little village where there was no heat, of course, except fire and coal. Actually, not coal, it was firewood. And the older ones, the grandparents, would sleep on top of the clay oven at night. It was a large clay oven in the middle of this room, and the older ones would sleep on top of the clay oven to keep from freezing to death. And the younger ones would huddle together like aleuts in an ice house. And that's why we're strong people. That's why I haven't caved despite the pressure of my life. And every time I start to whine to myself about how tough things are, I remember them. And by remembering them, I realize how easy I have it and how soft our lives are. And then I wake up and see this slob, an Arab professor at Fresno State, calling Barbara Bush an amazing racist, hiding behind her tenure. And I ask myself, and I ask my grandfather, once again I ask you, grandfather, my great-grandfather, what would you, great-grandfather, want for me to talk about today to millions of people? What is worthy of my soul on these airwaves? And I'll let you, the listener, tell me what the answer might be.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
The Savage Nation is sponsored by Swiss America, the only company I trust with my financial future. Call 800-289-2646 or SwissAmerica.com.
Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel.
They don't even have the internet there. Maybe you can go gather sugar cane with the Compaseros, you morons on the left. In the 60s, they sent their daughters there to go collect sugar. Morons. They loved Uncle Fidel. The horn concerts, they do something to me. They move me, just as this music once moved me and still does. Music is from another dimension, another universe of the human soul. I'm not going to now say, therefore, we have no music in America, because we still have great musicians in America. As you know, I love rock and roll music sometimes. Sometimes I like heavy metal music. But you see, music is in a different realm of what we're normally used to feeling. And what I'm getting at is talk radio can also take us to those dimensions. Unfortunately, many people are under the false impression that it has to be a banjo with one broken string that is played every day, all day long, repeating the same stories with different voices. Talk radio does not have to be limited to a one-string, one-note, or two-note concert every day, day in and day out, until the mind numbs and goes dead. You can create whole symphonies on talk radio, symphonies of thought, symphonies of ideas, symphonies of emotion. Am I reaching you out there, yes or no? Am I off in my own world again? If I am, forgive me, because this is the world I'm in today. And so I'm asking you again, if I said to you, what would my great-grandfather, who I never met, want for me to talk about today to millions of people? Because, you know, all through my life, even as a kid, I would do certain things and I would really feel the ancestors looking at me. And I would dismiss it, saying, they're not real. It doesn't matter what that old person thought. And I would go on and be the ordinary guy that, you know, we all are. But I don't know, maybe as I've gotten on in life, I come to realize that maybe it's not so imaginary. After all, they did exist for myself and for you. And maybe we suppress these ideas because we're not living in a world that respects or even recognizes that we come from somebody. Think about that. When have you last seen a movie produced by Katzenberg, Ratzenberg, and Matzenberg that extolled the wisdom of the aged? Tell me when. Instead, they extolled the wisdom of idiots in high school. The wisdom of morons who know nothing. They're supposed to lead you now. This is right out of Nazi Germany, where the young Hitler youth turned in their parents who were not sufficiently loyal to the Nazi party. That's where we're going in America today. So to look to the young people. I just love all the leftists. Look at the young people. What the hell do they have to teach us, you idiots, you? Nothing. That's why they're called young. They learned from the old.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
It's beautiful music, but I think for the average AM audience, they'll commit suicide. They'll have to call Dr. Schmendrick for a prescription after this. They listen to this too long, they'll feel depressed. Don't let them listen to this. That's it. It doesn't fit the times. Just think of the type of times that we're living in and the kind of music that matches it. You know, jailbirds, tattooed from head to toe, the type that Al Sharpton and Governor Cuomo want to vote the minute they get out of jail. I mean, because they're very compassionate people. They're not having ex-felons vote for any reason other than to make sure that they get reelected, that's all. They don't want taxpayers to vote. They want you to be outnumbered by those who haven't contributed anything to society. And the more criminals, the more illegal aliens, the bigger they become. Now, my grandfather would say to my great-grandfather would probably say, Michael, you can't fight what's going on in the world endlessly. The time clock. Listen to the metronome in your head, Michael. Is this how you want to spend the rest of your days? Talking about the slime of the earth? The Cuomos, the Browns, the criminals, the drug dealers, the illegal aliens. You want to talk about them the rest of your life? Is this what you were born for? Is this why God made you man-child in the promised land? Is this how you're supposed to spend the rest of your days? Anyone listening to this show, do you have conversations like this with yourself, whether you're a Texan or a Oklahoman on a range, whether you're a guy who rides cattle or something like that, or drives a tank in battle? Do you ever think about these things, or am I the last person on earth who even thinks about this? Today you're going to hear about it because this is where I'm going today. The time clock, the metronome. The metronome. It has no email. There's no email in the universe in which I'm currently functioning or speaking from. There's no email. There's no television. There's nothing in that world that you would understand. So I'm trying to talk to you from another dimension. Am I reaching anybody in this fallen universe of radio where I'm not supposed to go beyond, let's say, the parameters of today? What are the parameters of today? The barriers of the mind that I'm not supposed to work outside of. Lock her up. Mueller, Comey. Republicans, Democrats. Lock her up. Although I stabbed Trump in the back for a year straight as an anti-Trumper, I love him now because I'm trying to get access to him. And I know you're so stupid you don't know I was for Cruz and not for him. You think I've been loyal to Trump for years. You people have no collective memory. You don't even remember who in the radio business was bashing you and Trump for a year straight and now makes believe that he's the greatest bootlicker. He knows, though. Don't think he doesn't know. You know, it's like Santa Claus. He knows whether you've been good or bad, believe me. He knows if you've been good or bad. Trust me on that one, because he's told me he remembers who was loyal to him. One thing you can count on is he knows who his friends are. And he also knows who the Johnny-come-latelys are, too. And one of them who has allegedly a desk in the White House won't have one for too long. I can predict that. When I learned that moron was dictating the tweets to him, I said, no wonder we're in trouble in this country. A man with no education, a man who's the most self-serving person in the history of the media, is directing policy in this country. No wonder we're in such trouble. Maybe you ought to get someone around them who has a little knowledge, a little history, a little education, a little poetry in his soul, instead of a shillelagh and a nail gun. I say to myself, but my great-grandfather would say, Michael, that's not what you should be talking about. So I say, well, what should I be looking at? You're not the talk show host, great-grandfather. He said, well, what do you mean talk show? What do you do? I say, I'm on the radio and I write books. Okay, that's good. I understand books. What do you write about? Well, my last book was God, Faith, and Reason, great-grandfather. He says, good. What do you know about God that others don't know about? You know more about God than 1,000 years or 5,000 years of people who have studied this subject? You know more than them? He said to me. And I said to him, no, I don't know more, but I only know what I know. So he says, well, why would anyone want to think what you know? You're not a scholar of the subject. So I said, well, great-grandfather, apparently an awful lot of them did because it became a huge bestseller. He says to me, what's a bestseller? We never heard of such a thing in my world. We didn't buy books because they were bestsellers. We didn't read books because they were bestsellers. What did you read, great-grandfather? We only read one book, the Bible. That's all we read. We read it over and over and over and over again. I said, okay, fine. I'm not knocking it. Well, we have gone past that book. Oh, you have? And what has it led to in the world that you've gone past it? My answer to him was, what has just reading that one book taken us to in this world? When you consider that hundreds of thousands, not millions of people have been killed in the name of that one book. So you'd say, I don't like hearing that. He would say, well, you don't have to hear it. But it happens to be true. There are people right now killing their own co-religionists in the name of their one book. They have such faith in their own book, the Quran, that some of them kill each other in the name of their holy book, if they're not of the right side of the aisle there, where the Sunni kills Shia, Shia kills Sunni. He says, I never heard of them. I said, well, I'm glad you never heard of them. Good for you. Not only we hear of them, we're bringing them in by the millions in order to make sure that they bring their world to us. He said, I never heard of such things. Why would a nation commit suicide like this, he would say to me. Why? Because the nation's insane. Half the nation is on drugs, the other nation is fat and on other kind of drugs, and there's a few percentage of the people left who could actually use their minds. And that's not a very good thing, great-grandson, he would say. John, on KLIF, line 3, go ahead. What's your statement today?
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to speak. This is my third time on your show. If you remember, Michael, about a year ago, I called and complimented your ancestors, not knowing that this topic was going to come up again. So what I'm feeling in the spirit, your great-grandfather would tell you that you're spot on. The way you separate yourself from your competitive conservative hosts is that you acknowledge the Bible and our Creator and take us to a different dimension. That's why you have such a large audience, because they're feeding off your spirit, just like the guy that called about a week ago, the psychic. I understood where he was going with that. The best is yet to come. Stay the course. Stay resolute. What your grandfather is telling you through me right now, you're spot on. Don't get swallowed up in negativity. And I think one more thing, you talk about people killing each other in religion. Speaking of religion, as soon as they took prayer out of school, Michael, we need to sound the alarm and fight for our own kids' lives, this bullying. Oh,
you're 100% right. When they took the 10 Commandments out of the schools, what did they replace them with? The 10 Commandments of liberalism.
Michael,
you know what the 10 Commandments of liberalism are? Take a look at what's teaching in the schools, and you'll see what the 10 Commandments of liberalism are.
Right.
I hear you. You know, you sound very much like my good friend Congressman John Culberson of Houston.
Well, thank you. You know what? I'm the guy also that called the second time and told you I was the father of a Supreme Court justice.
You are?
Yes, sir.
Wait, which Supreme Court? The Texas Supreme Court or the U.S.?
It's a state out west. I don't want to... Anyway, I can leave my phone number, email address.
No, that would be great. I didn't know that I had such distinguished listeners. I thought that I only had people who say lock her up.
And you know what? I have to attribute that one thing, that firm disciplinary foundation, to my dad, who kids today don't even have any idea. First of all, I'm thankful I grew up at a time without cell phones. You saw the movie Sandlot. That's how I grew up. Not knowing that the Lord was going to give me an opportunity to pitch for 6 major league teams as I got older. It's just been an incredible deal. One of my ministries or hobbies is giving baseball lessons to kids from 6 to college.
Now, I got to get your email because you're an amazing human being. I can see that when I throw out a residence, it tends to resonate with the people who are also in an amazing state. John, stay on the phone because we're going to be in touch. This is amazing. I told you before in radio, there's an old adage. Well, I'll put it another way. There was a great 19th century American naturalist, if you know what the word even means anymore. That's not a person who strips naked at Coachella. A naturalist was someone who studied natural phenomena. Sorry, early biologists were naturalists. And I was infatuated by one of them named John Burroughs. And I used to go to the American Museum of Natural History. It was my favorite museum as a kid in New York. And there was a diorama of various animals, the grizzly bear, stuffed grizzly bear, and this and that, the gorilla. And there was one of John Burroughs, and I went and visited him up in somewhere on the Hudson River. You know, I studied a lot about his life. But he wrote some interesting books. And one of the things he wrote, this naturalist, was a line I kind of always remembered, which is, if you bait your hook with your heart, the fish will always bite. And that same truth applies in any sphere of life. Whether you are speaking to masses of people on radio or selling mufflers to someone in a muffler shop. If you speak from the heart, people will believe you. Now, if you're a con man, you can fake speaking from the heart. We're not talking about faking speaking from the heart. Just got this from my production team, Clint. It says, based on a startling new study, it appears that the experiences of your ancestor that lived 14 generations ago are potentially having an effect on your life right now. That's amazing. In the journal Science, very reputable, study of nematode worms, which is the most long-term form of the phenomenon ever discovered in a living animal. Now, of course, the scoffers who only went to high school or lower than that will say, oh, I smoke cigars and I have a Gulfstream. I'm not a worm. And, of course, you have to explain to them that we derive from the worm in some ways, or we share some of our genome with the worm. What's a genome? All I know is hamburgers and cigars and how to con the public every day. That's what I know. But this study in Science says that the lives of our grandparents do indeed have influences on our own day-to-day behaviors, and that there's now a chance that an ancestor born centuries ago may still be playing a hand in your life. Now, of course, that's assuming that what applies to nematode worms applies to humans, and that's a big if. I understand that. But if you look back at the basic science of this characteristic of biology, you'll find that it may not be so far from reality. And I'm sure that you listening to this show, even if you're a total atheist, if you're educated at all, let's say beyond that of the average talk show host, and you took even one course in science in the 7th grade, you understand that you do come from an ancestor. That's even if you are, let us say, someone who worked his whole life with his hands and with his blarney. You could understand, even you, that you have ancestors and that they may be functional or operational in your consciousness. Well, in your subconscious. And so if you tap into them, you don't know where it's going to lead. Every family, no matter who you're from, in every family there are ordinary people. There's probably someone who was a scholar, someone who was a poet, someone who was a genius, someone who was a criminal, someone who wound up in a madhouse, probably an axe murderer, probably a brigand or a criminal somewhere not too far removed in your ancestry, but they're all functional inside your DNA. It's an amazing thing to think about, is that what is it that keeps the average human from going off the rails? You look at the news, And what does the news focus on? The genius? No. The great composers? No. Those who conduct symphonies? No. Those who do ballet? No. What does the newspaper sell? Guy goes into a steakhouse in Harlem, and a bum comes in to panhandle him for money. He says, leave me alone. He stabs him in the back with a steak knife. That's what sells newspapers. So if you read that day and night, and that's what you live on, are the tabloids, the New York Post, all of them are tabloids. What your mind becomes is polluted. It's like a polluted stream. It's like a toxic waste dump. If you were to simply read these newspapers every day, or go online every day to the same news sources, what you're doing is dumping toxic waste into your soul and your mind. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So sometimes you have to step back. I once had a Japanese friend who came over from Japan who awarded, he was a representative of the Japan Creativity Society. Did I ever tell you that story? Yukio Murakami. And they awarded me the award, Creative Genius of the Year. In Japan, this was in 1985. And they flew me over. I'll tell you the story when I come back.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
The Savage Nation is sponsored by Swiss America, the only company I trust with my financial future. Call 800-289-2646 or SwissAmerica.com.
Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel.
You've heard me talk about home security. You've heard me tell you about Simply Safe. They're the best home security company that I've ever worked with, and I've worked with them since they were a startup. I met the owners. They're great people. They're very smart. And they've transformed into the fastest-growing home security company in the nation. They're now protecting over 2 million people. Now they have a brand-new system, rebuilt, redesigned, safeguards that you won't believe, power outages, down Wi-Fi, cut landlines, bats, hammers, everything in between. The all-new Simply Safe was redesigned to be practically invisible with powerful sensors so small you will hardly notice them, but you know who will? The intruders will see them. It'll keep them away. And this is what's truly remarkable to me. Simply Safe spent years building the system. They added so much, but you still get the same fair and honest price, 24/7 protection for only $15 a month, and there's no contract, smaller, faster, stronger than anything they've ever built. Supply limited. Just go to simplysafesavage.com now to order. That's simplysafesavage.com to protect your home and family today. Again, simplysafesavage.com. Well, it's one of those days where I've sped along here in this hour, and I was going to talk about the Arab professor at Fresno State who called Barbara Bush an amazing racist and then boasted she makes $100,000 a year and can't be fired. And I said, thank you, Jerry Brown. And then a listener says, Savage, you live by the First Amendment, and so do they. Don't you know what free speech is? And, of course, because I have a mind like a steel trap and I know Aristotelian logic, I said, faulty analogy, kids have to sit and be graded by her, while Prague listeners like you can just turn off my radio program. Obviously, you never learn to reason. So I'm trying to bring reason to the tabloid world of radio, and I took you to another dimension, I hope, by saying to you, only last Saturday did I receive a picture of my great-grandfather who I never met. There's an ancestor of mine, a relative of mine somewhere in America who's doing the family genealogy, and she got the pictures, and 1860, born, never met the man, died young in Europe somewhere. And I have said to you, what would my grandfather, my great-grandfather who I never met, want me to talk about with you today, to the millions of you who are listening to this show and will receive it around the world? And you're calling on it. But do you really get what I'm talking about? Do you?
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
So, I'm a dog, and I just got adopted by this new human guy, and I'm starting to wonder how he got along without me. I mean, okay, something as simple as walking around the block. He's got this leash thing, and he puts me on one end and him on the other, and I'm just taking him around. I think he's afraid of getting lost. Without that leash and me guiding him along, I don't think he'd find his way back home. But it's kind of cute.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.